Thanks again, Nick, for joining. This is the second episode of our podcast. This is the first one we're recording via telephone, so we have a number of auditory challenges that we'll have to overcome at some point, but we're sort of learning as we go. So any audio blips along the way, I apologize. I think that, we can just get right into it, Nick. You and I met a couple years ago. I kind of found out about you through your Fear of 13, the documentary, and of course the book. But over the last couple of years, I've watched even more challenges kind of beset you, and you kind of blast through them, which has been nice to see. But what I wanted to start off with was, you're from Philly area originally, and coming up, what was it like for you coming up, and how did you become the person you were before you got put into prison?
I grew up in Philadelphia in the 60s and 70s, and it was very tumultuous. I was one of the participants of the forced busing. In 1974, all of the equality efforts in the school systems were such that I was part of a forced busing where I wasn't allowed to attend my local school. I had to get on a bus and be transported into a disadvantaged area, and it just totally disrupted what was already chaotic for me anyway. So all of my educational process was tethered around all of these social things that were bigger events than my life. The very first one that really was problematic for me was that in 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, it was the very same year that I was attacked in my neighborhood by a sexual predator who beat my head in with a rock. And in the tumultuous era of this huge event in society, so many social issues like mine were just overridden. Just too much was going on with rioting in the streets and such. And so because everything was so big and powerful in society, I just felt like I couldn't bring this out. I wasn't important enough to tell anybody. I felt like everything else was so serious, my own problems didn't matter. And I festered in a secret.
And that was obviously relatively early, but teen years, how old were you when you started kind of having these run-ins with police and things of that nature?
Right about the age of 10, I became pretty much an alcoholic after discovering alcohol. The great gateway drug of alcohol led to everything else. So I was arrested at the age of 11 and 12 for petty things like juvenile delinquency. At the age of 13 and 14, I was constantly being kicked out of the school system. Like I said, because of the busing and the violence and being stabbed in the classroom and things like that. Eventually, I was kicked out of the Philadelphia school system, put into the juvenile delinquent corrections facilities. And by the time I was 17, I was just lost to society. I was so angry and bitter about my own internalized fears and embarrassment that I was a very aggressive person. Now, I was very, I guess I was difficult because I had a need for instant gratification, and I had a very big sense of myself with no fortitude. And the shame of it is I was very violent as well.
I read somewhere that you found an old picture, maybe from school or something in the 70s, and you realized that you were the only one still alive out of all those people in that picture. And I wondered, you've been through an incredible sort of ordeal, but I wonder if that was like where you were coming from. Do you think that a lot of people fell through those same cracks and really suffered like you did?
It was really fascinating to me to see a childhood photograph of myself along with like 24 other children. We were all in the neighborhood where I grew up. And as I realized, looking at each individual face, every single one of them was dead, drug overdose and murdered. car accidents, every single person. And the only person that didn't die was the person who left Philadelphia. And it was such a terrible area. If you've ever been to the Southwest Philadelphia area, you know it looks like Lebanon after they bombed the hell out of it. And it's terrible that the economics of the cities have fallen in bad times over the last 30 years. Because I realized that when I first got out of prison, there was no possible way I could ever rejoin my life. My life had been killed in so many ways that I had to start fresh. And one of the first things I did was I had to leave. And that's a terrible ordeal for someone who fought for 23 years to come home from death row for a murder they didn't commit, to go home only to realize there was no such thing as home.
It doesn't sound like there's any way to really turn around an area when it's become so toxic. And it's terrible to have to tell children when they're coming up, the best thing you can do is leave.
Right. And this is the problem we all face. The tethers of family overriding respect, love, dignity. That's not fair. People in relationships often find themselves inundated with bad behavior by people who get a pass or expect to be given a pass because they're connected to them biologically. And that's so unfair. So what I realized was I was actually doing them a favor. I was learning that if I went on and I found my own joy and happiness and solitude in life was able to be accepted, then I could be okay. And then they would understand that, or that if they truly cared about me, they would want me to proceed with my own happiness without fault or criticism. And that's where you find the truth out. If someone really loves you, they don't want to hold you back from being happy. And if someone cares about you, they don't want to be the instrument of your torment. So, yeah, I realized that the most important thing for me was to cut my family a break and get away from them, because they were going to be daily reminded of my destruction in their life, my conviction being the devastation that led to my father being abused in work areas and my mother being spit on in public and called the mother of a murderer.
You can actually see that there is some type of, and might be talking out of turn a little bit here because I'm not a scientist, but those genetic underpinnings to try and stick with the connections of where you came from, or what are very strong and hard to break. So sometimes you do just have to leave, to move forward. So that's a tough lesson to learn, though, and have to go through.
Yeah, it's really difficult for people to understand this, but we are directly dealing with the science of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a daily action that you can create within your behaviors that overrides all of these things. Now, the intrinsic feeling of owing someone because they're family is noted by everyone. And how to deal with that, like we said, you either move on or you try to find an established way to not be toxified by that relationship. And then the wonderful thing about it is we can heal that ourselves through acts of kindness and polite behavior, through a regimen of actually being outwardly outgoing towards others and bonding with them. You create your own neuroplastic healing. And it's so fundamental to my life that's why Robin Sharma, who goes around speaking about this, found out that I exemplify his teachings by behavior, not by going out and speaking about it, but my daily routine of being a very polite, very congenial person, very outwardly nice person, rewards my brain with healing. I've overcome every form of PTSD that people can imagine, from childhood sexual attack to having drug abuse in my life dominate my life, to being wrongly convicted and overcoming many tragedies. The one thing that science is now proving is that through my behavior, I am healing myself by good acts. It's no different than praying, listening to music, going out and interacting with children, animals, and these are the bonding healing tools that are intrinsically implanted within us. And science is now turning towards this field of wonderful studies that shows that we can heal ourselves.
It wasn't like you just burst out of this neighborhood and this all came together. I don't want to spend too much time on our call going over your case that put you on death row. That is well documented in your book and the documentary Fear of 13, of course. But we do know that you were convicted of a rape and murder that put you on death row. You were on death row for more than 20 years. But to go from what you just described growing up and your lack of sort of proper education to then having to learn, right? You had to teach yourself some of this science and some of the legalese so that you could then fight to get the evidence put into court and have multiple trials and then get out. But, how did you grow within this toxic environment, which is prison and death row, to teach yourself those things and then have sort of the will to continue to fight to see it through and actually succeed in the end?
Okay, so it comes down to self-respect. I was sitting there at the age of 21 years old, convicted of rape, kidnapping, of murder of a woman I never met. I have 105 years in total sentences, plus the death penalty, and I'm going to be incarcerated in a solitary confinement until they execute me. I have no hope of going home, and the only thing that made sense to me at that point was to begin an education process that would allow me, on the day of my execution, to have the eloquence to stand up for myself. I had to overcome dyslexia and a speech impediment that made me sound very ugly. My manner of speaking was very ugly. So, without ever knowing about neuroplasticity, I began a process that was twofold. I began an educational process that was autodidactic, meaning I wasn't guided by teachers or instructors. But in truth, we're all autodidactic. We all teach ourselves by learning from others. So I applied the principles of every effort that I could manage to start to build an education so that I could fight my legal case, that I could stand up in the courts and understand the law, that I could also further communicating with people, because every effort had to be in writing. I was in solitary confinement. You cannot survive in that without being able to be literate. So, through a very dedicated act, year after year, I read thousands upon thousands of books, and I educated myself. And then I understood some of the principles further when I studied psychology for 6 years by taking university courses via correspondence. And then I started to really understand that my education was giving me the foundation to have separation from my toxic environment. And this is what I tell children when I go around speaking to them. I think that once you can master a self-sense of your being from your education, you don't suffer the toxic effects of being around negative people. You can dismiss that because you know better. And I think this is where it started to work for me. That a second fold of my development, which was key to everything, was I took a singular photograph of myself and put it on the wall. And I started to teach myself how to speak beautifully to myself. It was very important that I began a cadence. It gave me the ability to slow my mind so I wouldn't use or distractive noises in between words. And then I learned to build up my dictum and my vocabulary so well that when I spoke, it had meaning to me. Therein lied my whole purpose of developing my sense of self. And I learned how to respect myself and love myself for it. And it gave me an empowerment over the worst possible imagined toxic situation you could be in.
As you said, we're all self-learners to a certain extent, and I feel that way about myself. But I can't imagine going through that and then just being able to teach I have enough fear of the legal system as it is to try and do anything I can to avoid it. Getting inside of it and then trying to get out, I think is, so you went through this legal battle, what did it take you? It was.
All right. So let me give a brief synopsis so we can be in cogent form. In 1981, I was convicted of the rape and murder of Linda Mae Craig, a woman who was murdered in Delaware, driven into Pennsylvania, and her body was found there. I was arrested on unrelated charges and became the focal point of the investigation by my own stupid efforts to barter my way out of false charges levied against me by a police officer who said I tried to murder him, by making up a story about that investigation of the Craig homicide. When the police realized I was a liar, they then framed me for the murder. I then spent the next 21 years on death row, 23 years in total in solitary confinement. I was unfortunately the subject of a manhunt in 1985 when I escaped from death row, and I ended up turning myself back into police custody after 25 days. I was then the very first man in the United States in 1988 to file an application to prove my innocence using DNA testing. And it took me 15 agonizing years from that point to make the DNA testing work. And it only worked because in 2002, I was stricken with hepatitis C. And I was told that I was in failure mode of my liver. And because I was dying rapidly of the illness, I asked to be executed. It was then that the federal court stepped in, and by 2003, DNA evidence proved me innocent. A year later, they released me in January of 2004.
And then, of course, you get out, and life still has challenges for you. I know when I met you, you were out on the West Coast, but you had just come from the UK, went through your ups and downs, but you eventually seemed to be settled and had a daughter.
Let's be clear for listeners what you're describing. So I then went back to England and I met my current partner, Laura, and we had this beautiful baby named Jamie Lee in August of 2016. In January of 2017, she died in her crib of what they call SIDS. It's a horrible, fucked up moment. I'm sorry for the language, but it's true. And it destroyed me to put a baby down for a nap and come back a half hour later and she's dead. And I was the last person in life to hold her. And it really hurt me that I then watched as so many good intending people allowed me to then suffer further. And we couldn't even bury our child with grace and dignity. It was really terrible. So then, once again, I just relied on my talent and I kept writing and working. And I was so pleased when the work I did with you, Kurt, came out to be a nice song called Transition on the CD. And I love that. I love that I kept trying. I went out and found a man who had bipolar disorder, who was an alcoholic, and I helped change his life. And I figured, it doesn't matter what sorrow I go through, as long as I can make a meaningful impact on someone else's life, then what happens to me doesn't matter. I got myself together. I got my film deal done. So my movie deal, a major motion picture deal, is going to be made. And from this effort, I came back to the United States. And now I'm here in Oregon with my wife and 2 surviving children, and I'm doing it. I'm doing what you saw, Kurt. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I'm going to get up and I'm going to handle it because I'm not being drugged down by toxic events in my life. I'm having to face hardship. And the difference is, no matter what faces me or befalls me, I'm remaining a nice person, a kind and dignified person, so that those around me don't suffer greater by my anger.
The phrase I fall back on regularly is, stories are the currency of life. And I remember talking with you and your talent really is storytelling. And you're able to tell stories through experience, and so those experiences aren't always happy. Seeing where you guys are now, and you and your wife and the kids, and it's a long way from Philly in the 70s, and I'm sure that there's still challenges out there, but it seems like you're finding the good parts and the happy parts now. So, enjoy them as you can, which I'm sure you do.
I do, sir. And I really am grateful. Every time my wife feeds me, I say, thank you. I think we've lost so much of the respect that needs to be shared. I can't say this enough. The reason I can handle anything and continue on is because I recognize that I have a vow to everyone. Once you care about another person, once you bond with that person, you have a vow, an honest vow of self-respect of whoever you are to be that person throughout your life. So for me, I'm going to keep my vow. I'm not going to break my vows to anyone, because I'm going to not break my vows to myself. And my vows are very simple. No matter what I go through, I refuse to let my kindness be taken from me. My kindness is so precious to me because it makes me gregarious, charming, loving, and sweet. And it also gives me a hell of a talent to tell stories and give people a sense of rewarding endeavor, that feeling that they shared the ride with me. So as long as I keep my vow there, I think I'm going to be okay, Kurt. I really believe that.
Yeah, I do too. I also think, as much as science has helped us and is good that has come out of the progress we've seen in science, with Jamie's story, of course, there's still things science doesn't understand. So there's still progress to make, and there's still work to be done. So, I appreciate you, chatting about that. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, we're all going to have tests. And people keep doing this thing where they diminish their own sorrows when they meet me and say, look, my problems are nothing like yours. Your problems are yours, and they're meant to make you beautiful. This is what really fascinates me. People are so afraid to feel pain for themselves that they'll take pills constantly because they're so afraid of pain. But without that pain, there's no possible way for you to be a beautiful human being. And it's such a shame that we're so afraid to feel someone else's pain that we go on justifying why we shouldn't get involved, or it's too much, or it's just inviting problems on ourselves. And I think that's the problem. We're so afraid of pain, but we want so much good. We constantly want joy. Even Kim Il-sung, who is the leader of North Korea, just celebrated his birthday. So you see, good has to win, because even the most venal person wants good for themselves, even if they can't recognize it. I am so blessed with the gift that I was given to be incarcerated so I could study society and learn how not to be sucked dry by its pitfalls.
I'm keeping tabs on you, at least via the Facebook. So you guys look to be doing good. Moving forward in progress, what are you mentioned a movie you're working on. What do you have going on now? What's your plan?
Okay, so my latest book is called My Journey Through Her Eyes, which details the year-long ordeal that I just described, from losing my daughter to this moment of speaking to you. I just previously to that wrote the book, The Kindness Approach, trying to teach people about neuroplasticity, because this science is very important to me. And also, in the meantime, I'm trying to work with myverse.com to bring an educational platform to children all over the world to help them identify the field of study they want to go towards. While that's going on, Kurt, I'm trying to hustle any kind of speaking that I can to get the rent, and I'm taking care of my family day to day. I have inordinate amounts of pain going on because of broken bones and previous injuries. So I've been working very hard to not let that interfere with my efforts. So in the meantime, man, I really want to say this to you, and I hope it's recorded. I love you, sir. You allowed me to find grace and dignity in our friendship. That is so important to me that I will do my best to never let you feel disappointed.
Well, I appreciate that. I think, my wife Serena's on the call. We've got Ken and Hillary. They will all attest to the fact that it goes against everything you've said on this call, but I sort of have an allergic reaction to the word love.
Yeah, that's all right, man. Because you know what? Respect is love.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, the one thing that breaks down with couples is the first thing is respect. In my highest form, sir, I have the utmost respect for who you are, and I love the things that you're doing. Fair enough?
I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, guess what, Kurt? You already say it every day, young man. You just don't get it. And can I tell you this? And this is very important, sir. One of the most fascinating studies of my life was the study of religions. I read all of the world's religions. And the one really fascinating feature of the Sanskrit religion is that words are used to describe the feelings of things. So the words describing a chair are describing sitting. So it taught me this wonderful thing. Every word that you say has meaning. The influx of your voice, the nuance to it, every bit of it. So, sir, I hope you master the word love, because the way you can say love can be so powerful, it can cut right through a human being.
You speak very well for what you've gone through. You do a much better job than I do, and thank you for your time, and sincerely appreciate it. We'll probably be launching this episode January 22nd, so we'll send you some news when that's happening, and we'll definitely follow up and be in touch with you as we go.
Kurt, there was one night I was in. Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that from all of you. Kurt, there was one night I was in a rental car in Los Angeles, and it was really bad. I got in a room today. I paid that back.